I will tell you some general ideas and illustrate them in practice. The first general idea is that, the main idea of a chess game is the activity of the pieces. All other rules are more concrete ways on how to realize that main principle. Now we'll see it in practice. e4. c5. Knight f3. You know that a chess game consists of an opening, middle game, and endgame. So we need to know what exactly we will do in each parts. Regarding the opening, there are three main tasks which we need to realize. Number 1. Develop the pieces. Number 2. Castle. And number 3. Connect the rooks, by moving the queen. A typical mistake is to start an attack before realizing the three main tasks of the opening. Another idea is that we need to develop the pieces, so pawn moves could be good only if they prepare to develop your pieces. d6. d4. c takes d4. Knight takes d4. Knight f6. The main tasks for every stage of the game give you general guidance. There are strategic principles that will assist you to find the best moves in any position. One of them is the principle of the least active piece. It means that you require to find the piece which is the least active, and improve its position. For example, in this situation, black is attacking the e4 pawn. White has a bunch of ways to defend it, by knight c3, bishop d3, f3, queen f3. First, we understand that developing the queen is the third task of the opening, so we should not move the queen at such an early stage of the game. Otherwise, the opponent will start to attack our queen and gain some extra tempos for development. Also, we know that we need to develop the pieces, so we don't want to make a pawn move to f3. Now we need to know which piece we should develop, the bishop or the knight. Let's use the principle of the least active piece to resolve this question. The bishop is already active, it controls long diagonal. The knight is completely passive. So the answer is, we need to develop the knight first. Knight c3. a6. Now white needs to develop the bishops. Where do we require to put them? There is another strategic principle that can help us. It is the principle of maximum activity. It means that we need to put the pieces as forward as possible on the board. So the white squared bishop should be placed on c4, the black squared bishop on g5. You can see that even without any knowledge of opening theory, you can discover the best moves easily. Bishop e3. In this game, white played bishop e3 only because of concrete preparation against his opponent. e5. Knight f3. Bishop e7. Bishop c4. Short castle. Short castle. Bishop e6. Now we can see a circumstance when the pieces attack each other. There exist strategic rules about this type of situation also. We should keep up the tension. So we should not take an opponent's piece, because it will help him to get the more active position. If white takes the bishop, it will help black open the f-file for his rook. And also the e6 pawn will cover the d5 and f5 squares. White has two ways to protect the bishop. White can play bishop b3 or play queen e2 to support the bishop. Which move is better? Certainly, queen e2 because it defends the bishop and also develops the queen. But in the game white played bishop b3, just because of his preparation against his enemy. Bishop b3. Bishop takes b3. Now we can realize that it is an error. Removing the tension gives a new open line for the white's rook. A takes b3. Knight bd7. Queen e2. White has now connected the rooks. So white has completed the main opening tasks. Rook e8. White is starting the middle game. What should we do in the middle game? In the middle game, we need to start an attack. To start an attack we should compose a strategy. 2 steps help us to find an effective plan. 1. We need to realize an object of the attack. And number 2. We should find a way how to attack that object with our pieces. The easiest object of an attack is the opponent's weaknesses. Weaknesses are the pawns or the squares on the 5th and on the 6th rank, which can't be protected by pawns. In this position, the d5 square and the d6 pawn are the weaknesses. Sometimes, we can see a situation when an opponent can make a pawn move and protect the square, but at the same time, he will weaken another square in his position. This situation happens for the a5, b6, and f5. For example, the f5 square can be protected by the move g6, but it will weaken the h6 square. So we can say that f5 is a weakness also. So in this position, the object of attack for white will be the a5, b6, d6, d5, and f5. So how can we decide what exactly we will attack? There is another strategical principle. the principle of the center. It means that the central squares are the most important on the board. As a general conclusion, first of all, we should attack the weaknesses in the center. In this position, the first stage of composing a plan for white is that he needs to attack the d6, d5, and f5 weaknesses. In the second stage, we need to think about how can we use our pieces to attack these weaknesses. How can we do it? The rook should go on d1. It will attack d6 and d5. Another rook will also be placed on the d-file, so we can double the rooks there to attack d6 and d5 weakness. The c3 knight will be transferred to d5 square in the future. How can we use the bishops? It should go on g5, pressure the knight on f6 that defends d6. And regarding the f3 knight, it should go to h4 and then on the f5. After composing a plan, it becomes easier for us to play. Because we know what we should do and how would we do it. Rook fd1. White is beginning to realize his plan. Why did white start with this rook? The principle of the least active piece works. Because the other rook is already active, it got an open line on the file. Queen c7. Now white has three logical moves: knight d5, bishop g5, and knight h4. When we have a choice, we should start to calculate variations. After 14 knight d5, knight takes d5, rook takes d5, knight f6, black double attacks the rook on d5 and the pawn on e4, so it is not good. So we need to make one of the two other moves: bishop g5 or knight h4. Bishop g5. Rook a c8. Knight h4. g6. After this move, the position changed a little bit. After changes in the position, we should make corrections in our plan. When stable factors in the position which are material and pawn structure, we should make corrections to our plan. The g6 move covered the f5 square but weakened the f6 and h6 squares. Now it will add to white's target of attack. How can we use our pieces to attack these weaknesses? The queen will go to d3 or on f3. Rooks should be placed on the d-file. The c3 knight will go to d5. And the h4 knight can be transferred to d5 square, using the maneuver knight h4 to g2 and e3. Certainly, we need to make the move of the g2 pawn first. g3. Bishop f8. Now white has several logical moves: queen f3, knight g2, and rook d2. One of the most important principles of chess is the principle of attack. When we make attacking moves, we improve the position of our pieces and force the opponent to go back or make defensive moves. Queen f3. You can see that it is easy to find the right moves with the right system of thinking, because typically we have just one or two possible attacking moves, and we can easily make one of them. Right now white has two possible attacking moves: knight d5 and queen f3. But knight d5 doesn't work, because knight d5, knight takes d5, rook takes d5, queen takes c2, so we should play queen f3. Bishop g7. Which move should white play now? Again, the most aggressive move. Knight g2 is good, but rook d2 followed by rook a1 will be the best, because it attacks black's position. Rook d2. h6. Bishop takes f6. Knight takes f6. Rook a d1. Rook c d8. Knight g2. Queen e7. Knight e3. Queen e6. Knight c4. Again an attacking move, forcing black to go back or to defend the weakness. White's knight c4 not only forces black to go back with his bishop and decrease its mobility, but it also increases the knight's activity. That's why attacking moves are the best. Bishop f8. Knight d5. Knight takes d5. Rook takes d5. Queen c8. Queen d3. This is also an attacking move, because it helps in attacking the d6 weakness. White is threatening knight takes e5 using the pin on the rook on d8. Bishop e7. c3. Queen c6. f3. h5. King g2. Defending against all black's tactical tricks before taking the d6 pawn. King f8. Knight takes d6. Bishop takes d6. Rook takes d6. Rook takes d6. Queen takes d6, check. Queen takes d6. Rook takes d6. White has successfully realized the middle game plan. Now we can see an endgame position. In the endgame, we also need to compose a plan. Since in the endgame we usually can't attack the king, the plan will be different, compared to the middle game. In the endgame, the biggest value is the pawns. The pawn structure determines the plan. There are two main plans for the endgame. 1. Advance your passed pawns to promote them to a new queen. And number 2. Attack the opponent's weak pawns. For example, in this position, the white will plan to use his pawn majority on the queenside to create a passed pawn on the c-file and to attack black's weak pawns on b7 and f7, so white is going to combine these two plans. Rook e7. King f2. Principle of the least active piece works. In the endgame, the king should be in the center. Rook c7. King e3. King e7. Rook b6. Principle of maximum activity. We should make the moves of the pieces as forward as possible. We should not go back if possible. Rook d7. f4. In the endgame, the active side should make the pawns forward, as the pawns will be closer to the 8th rank and fix the opponent's weaknesses. E takes f4, check. G takes f4. King d8. b4. King c7. Rook f6. King d8. h4. King e7. Rook b6. King f8. e5. King e8. King e4. King f8. f5. G takes f5, check. King takes f5. King g7. e6. F takes e6, check. King takes e6. White wants to transfer the king to the queenside. Generally, in the endgame, the king should support your passed pawns, and the rook should attack the opponent's pawns. Rook c7. King d5. Rook f7. King c4. Rook c7, check. King b3. King h7. c4. King g7. c5. King h7. King c4. King g7. b5. A takes b5, check. King takes b5. King h7. b4. King g7. Rook d6. Rook f7. King b6. Black resigns.